Begins at a U.S. Army airfield in Roswell, New Mexico.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
I was called to headquarters, was given copies of a press release which stated in essence that we had in our possession a flying disc. I was told to hand deliver to the foreign news media we had in town at that time.
Walter Hout was the public relations officer for the 509th Bomb Group. His
colonel, who was much more knowledgeable, naturally, say no, that was a new type of weather balloon.
But the residents of Roswell believed it was something more than a weather balloon.
My father was on the intelligence team at the Roswell Army Airfield, and it was his job to look at what they thought was a crashed aircraft or crashed something out there out of Roswell. When he came in, he was very excited. He woke my mother and myself up at must have been 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and he wanted us to see what he was bringing in from the field. He said, this is parts of a flying saucer, and it was all brought in and spread out on the kitchen floor, and we just looked at it. You know, I picked up this, I thought at first, this is hieroglyphics or some kind of writing like that. It certainly looked alien to me.
While researching a book on the incident, author Kevin Randall discovered that more people had handled the crash debris than anyone had ever suspected.
I think it like the foil-like material that you could wad up in a ball and let it go and it would unfold itself.
They tried to burn it and they couldn't burn it. It wouldn't catch on fire, and they took out their pocket knives and they tried to cut it, and they couldn't cut it.
Amazingly, Frankie Rowe's father also told her he had seen convincing living proof.
There were 2 bodies that were laying on the ground outside of this craft, and that there was one still alive.
Through his numerous interviews with those connected to the Roswell incident, Kevin Randall has been able to put together a sequence of events from the time the spacecraft and bodies were recovered.
The best evidence we have from a number of eyewitness sources is that the craft and the bodies were brought to Hangar 84 on the brilliant what they did. They announced they have a flying saucer, but they've already captured it. They've already got it. There's nothing to see, so nobody goes out looking for the thing. Then they shift everything to Fort Worth. The higher headquarters says, no, those guys made a mistake. It was just a weather balloon. The press can't find Jesse Marcel because he's in Fort Worth and he's been silenced.
You know, when he came back from Carswell after flight, years later, he confided that he was actually part of the cover-up.
I held it, and he got mad, and he got louder, and he would say, I want you to understand, you were never there. You did not see anything. You did not hear a conversation. And he said, if you can't understand this, there are things that we can do.
5.
Daddy said they looked like a small 10-year-old child. The head was too large. I can tell skin color in this, but the size, the shape of the eyes, that would all pretty well fit.
The nurse that was supposedly there described an individual that may have looked somewhat like the individual that was being autopsied. The large head, the black eyes. I think she described 4 fingers rather than 6. So there's a discrepancy or difference there.
According to Frankie Rowe, her father discovered 3 beings still alive at the crash site.
He kept saying, there's no need for us to be afraid. They're not here to hurt us. And he said that he really felt badly that we couldn't help them. I feel very sorry for whoever that was. If it was from some other world, planet, their family will never know what happened to them. They'll never go back home.
Black and white, and he's kind of flipping around I-beams with hieroglyphics in it. Somehow there was, I guess, an alien writing on the metal, and then the camera pans a table strewn with metal parts. There's somehow 6-fingered, debossed images, basically what looks like handprints inside of metal, Ray said those were the alien dashboards, maybe, of the craft.
Denies it, keeping the same position it's taken for almost 60 years, ever since the Roswell incident. UFO researcher Stanton Friedman and others say the U.S. government is hiding the complete UFO file and proof of a Roswell UFO crash.
How about the analysis of the materials? How about the autopsy reports? How about the eyewitness testimony from those who stood guard, those who carried it, those who tested it at various government labs?
There is no question that film exists of the autopsy. When you have an event like this, you're going to film every aspect of it. We've been told by people who participated in the cleanup on both the debris field and the impact site that photographs were taken. Film was taken. All this exists somewhere.
Though the alien autopsy footage released in 1995 has been shown to be fraudulent, it is still possible that other authentic film exists of extraterrestrials. Dr. Michael Maloney, honorary fellow of the Royal Photographic Society, recalls an amazing experience he had years ago as a press photographer covering Walt Disney Studios that suggests real aliens have been filmed.
On the 28th of March 1978, I was invited to have lunch with the executives of Disney. So a car arrived for me and took me to this house in LA, and I sat down in the lounge. It was a very conventional type of home, and they put this projector up and they started to show the film of what I now know is the alien autopsy. I didn't know at the time, and I was fascinated by it. And suddenly you've got all these guys in white coats, a very clinical area, a long table that looked like an old-fashioned operating theatre. I remember a telephone on the wall, a very old-fashioned telephone with a spiral cord. And as the camera moved round, it was filmed by a professional. Definitely filmed by... This was not home movies. And it moved around to the operating slab, and there are these specialists, these doctors, surgeons, performing a post-mortem on what looked like a creature from E.T. film. But then the camera, when it pulled back to a wide-angle shot, on the floor in the corner was an identical alien, or whatever looked like an alien, and it was moving. Now, I can only presume that the one that was on the slab was dead, but the one that was on the floor was moving. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. And at the end of it, they stopped the film and said, what do you think to that? I said, fantastic. I've never seen anything like this in my life.
Could it be that the film Michael Maloney was shown in 1978 has some direct connection to the hoaxed alien autopsy footage created in 1995? And is the 1995 film released by Ray Santilli somehow patterned after the real thing?
And when I saw it for the first time, I've seen it 3 times now, but when I saw it for the first time, it was very, very similar to the room that I was looking at in March 1978. And I thought, wow, that's the same place. They are the same people. But of course, a lot of the original footage that I saw was missing. The alien in the corner, that was missing. And there were a number of little things that were missing that I saw in the original 16mm film. But I can assure you of one thing, that the original film that I saw was brilliant. It was real.
I have pieces of what is called a flying saucer.
They also say the U.S. government covered it up with threats and intimidation.
And if anybody got close, they were told to shoot to kill.
Whatever happened at Roswell, I believe that the government covered it up.
The government's brutal tactics left lasting emotional wounds on the residents of the town. But now, the survivors of Roswell are risking their lives to speak out.
Obviously, our families have been greatly affected. Our parents' lives were changed, and we never knew why.
Roswell was the home of the 509 bomb group of the Army Air Force. It was the only unit in the world with the atomic bomb. Jesse Marcel was the base intelligence officer.
It was late one night when my dad came in. He woke my mother and myself up out of a sound sleep to show us some debris that he brought in from the desert.
The debris came from a crash of an unknown craft.
And he was very excited. He called this stuff parts of a flying saucer. There was some metal foil-like material, jagged like it had been ripped or torn.
Marcel's son says he noticed some pieces contained symbols that looked like hieroglyphics.
It was a series of geometrical patterns. It was certainly very different from anything I'd ever seen before or since.
Another Roswell resident was 12 when her father told her about a close encounter of the third kind.
My dad came home from work. He was really excited.
Her father and his fellow firefighters were summoned to the site of a second crash.
You're not going to believe what we saw when we got there, but we saw a crash of one of the flying saucers. And he said one of them was still alive, and it was walking around. And he said there were two other bodies, but they were in body bags, so he really couldn't see them. He gave us a description about their size, said they were about the size of a small 10-year-old child.
With the number of witnesses growing, the military rushed to create an alternative story. They forced Captain Marcel to go along with the cover-up.
The material that he had taken to General Ramey was taken from him, and then a substitute. Pieces of an old weather balloon were laid out, and the news media were called in, and Major Marcel had to pick up a piece and show it. It was a blatant lie.
The military conspiracy left lifelong scars on the people they threatened.
Not being able to tell the truth, I think, hurt our family. I feel like a part of our security has been destroyed.
Some have a theory about why aliens were watching the area.
I believe that the reason there were so many flying saucers was that the atomic bomb went off. So I think they were observing what was going on. I think they knew what was going on.
When Roswell's radio station reported the incident, the newsmen heard from the government.
The Federal Communications Commission said, the next word you pop out of this, we'll monitor you. Do it and you're dead.
Frankie Rowe found some of the crash debris at the fire station.
I reached over and I got it. And I picked it up and played with it.
Then the military confronted Frankie with a threat that has plagued her for the rest of her life.
A man that I believe was an officer came into the house and he said, I understand that you think you saw something. And I said, well, I saw a piece of material. And he said, no, you didn't. And the more I said, yes, I did, the more emphatic he got that, no, I didn't. You can never talk about this the rest of your life. And he said, there are things we can do. We can take you out here in the desert, and no one will ever find your bodies. You'll all be dead. I don't want to live this again, because we don't know for sure they won't do something. They promised they would come back so long as I lived. How do I know they won't?
Was the Roswell incident a close encounter of the third kind? Extraterrestrial contact? The government says no. But Frankie Rowe and her fellow survivors feel they've paid a terrible price for the government's cover-up.
I think the world should be told all of the details from the beginning, but I don't think this is the only incident, and I think we are entitled to know about all of them.
It's the most famous UFO event in history. The supposed crash of an alien spacecraft near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. The specimen belongs to Dr. Roger Lear, a California podiatrist and UFO researcher.
The colors, according to the scientists at the laboratories, indicate that this may have been subjected to extremely high temperatures, maybe in millions of degrees. If you took and held one end of this piece and you just dipped the tip of it into water that was about the temperature of tea water, the end that you were holding would get so hot you couldn't hold it. You had to drop it.
The fragment was given to Lear by a close friend, Jim Fueling, who died of cancer in 2002. Fueling had taken the object as collateral for a loan to a friend. That friend had been stationed at Roswell Air Base in 1947 and claimed that he stole the fragment during the cleanup of the crash site. Fueling, a UFO enthusiast, believed the story.
This was a passion for him, the paranormal. I was interested, but not to the point of where he was. I mean, he would take something down a road and follow it like a bloodhound.
In 1997, Jim asked his brother Bob, a commercial chemist, to analyze the object.
The most interesting characteristic was the absence of any metallic element. I found no lines. Apparently it was very pure material. It certainly wasn't simply common material that you would buy in Sears or Radio Shack. It was unusual. I told him it was very unusual material. But of course that doesn't establish that it's extraterrestrial.
Nor that it came from the Roswell crash. Ever since the incident, there had been reports about pieces of evidence. Jesse Marcel Sr., an intelligence officer assigned to investigate the scene, talked to reporters for the first time in 1979 about what he found at Roswell.
There were just fragments strewn all over the area, an area about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. So we proceeded to pick up the parts. He says, I tried to bend this stuff. He says, it will not bend. One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else, which we didn't know what it was.
Marcel's son, Jesse Jr., was 11 years old when his father showed him pieces of the Roswell wreckage.
He'd spread some debris on the kitchen floor. And he says, you know, this is something, I think he said flying saucer. I think this is part of a flying saucer or words to that effect. And I myself was not quite sure what the word flying saucer meant, but I sure found out later. So we kind of plowed through the debris and just mounds of foil-like debris, some black plastic. I thought Bakelite debris at the time, fractured like a phonograph record.
Following orders, Jesse Sr. took the debris to a facility in Fort Worth, Texas. When he returned, his mood had changed dramatically.
He told us not to talk about this when he came back from Fort Worth. He said, you know, this is a non-event, didn't happen, forget about it, so act like it never happened.
Jesse Marcel Jr. has examined Roger Lear's sample on 2 occasions. He finds it very similar to some of the alleged Roswell debris his father showed him in 1947.
There's a reflective surface on one side and a dull surface on the other. There were certain characteristics that were the same, you know, like the color was the same, it was fractured. There's at least 2 references there that made it resemble the Bakelite that I'd seen that night on the floor.
Dr. Lear submitted a small sample of the specimen to Dr. Russell Vernon Clark at the University of California at San Diego. He used electron spectroscopy testing, a process which would establish the elemental and molecular structure of the material. 99.9% of the substance turned out to be silicon, but the silicon in the sample contained ratios of isotopes considered out of the ordinary.
These ratios can tell you whether something is normal from this planet or maybe identify it if it comes from another spatial body, such as another planet. When the laboratory looked at the silicone, that they found that the ratios were not only non-terrestrial, not from this Earth in nature, but they were so far out that it would be almost impossible to even put this thing together. Another laboratory that he sent it to indicated that the object was manufactured. It had a surface on it that looked like it had been machined.
The tiny percentage of the material that was not silicon also showed signs of abnormal isotopic ratios. 3 other labs received the same sample for testing.
And the results were conclusive that this piece was, number one, manufactured and contained elements that were non-terrestrial.
The test results confirmed for Jesse Marcel Jr. the instinct he'd felt for 50 years.
I've been pretty sure that this was not of human manufacture, based on my gut feeling and the fact that the material is totally different. You know, I'm an aircraft examiner, and I've seen a lot of wrecked aircraft. I've never seen anything like this before. So I'd always kind of felt that, yeah, that was something very unusual.
In 2001, Roger Lear, other UFO investigators, and those involved in the specimen testing scheduled a press conference to discuss their findings in Oakland, California. The conference was being organized by a former network news producer, and a website was set up for a live streaming video feed.
The UFO conference was all set, everything was ready to go, and suddenly I got a phone call telling me that the conference had been canceled. I asked my friend what happened, and he said, well, I really can't tell you at this time, but check out the website. So I went to the computer and put in the URL for the website, and suddenly the screen went black.
UFO investigator Jason Martell had designed and set up the conference website.
I'm freaking out because it's all gone. I'm trying to access the FTP server. I'm trying to look at the logs and see where the data is, and it's literally not there because our box, our server, was physically unplugged and moved. They said it was scheduled for service for a RAM upgrade. No reason for anyone to touch it, yet it was moved.
To add further intrigue, Roger Lear received another call from the producer who first told him about the cancellation of the conference.
Early that morning, two gentlemen in suits with proper identification came into his office and asked him to please accompany them. And they took him and put him in a van, drove him around the San Francisco Bay Area for 11 hours, and told him there is no UFO International press conference.
Could there have been a conspiracy to prevent new Roswell test results from being publicized? There's no way to know, but the conference never occurred. More significantly, those who have had anything to do with the specimen have, coincidentally or not, been subjected to difficult, if not tragic, circumstances.
Most people that have been involved with this specimen are dead. The original owner, dead from supposed motorcycle accident. The second owner, dead. The scientist that did a major part of the work strangely dies of 2 forms of leukemia. The television producer involved remains frightened. Based on the past history of what's happened, I'm extremely concerned about the object being in my possession.
Izvanzemaljci su doista sletjeli u Novi Meksiko 1947. stoji u dokumentu koji je objavio FBI na svojim internetskim stranicama. Godinama su bili tajni, a u njima specijalni agent spominje tanjuriće u kojima su nađena 3 tijela koja imaju ljudski oblik, ali su visoka samo 1 metar. Zašto je FBI baš sada objavio taj dokument, nije jasno.
Ako je vjerovati FBI-u, izvanzemaljci su doista sletili u Novi Meksiko 1947. stoji u dokumentu koji su objavili na svojim internetskim stranicama. U njemu specijalni agent spominje leteće tanjure u kojima su nađena 3 tijela ljudskog oblika i visoka tek 1 metar. Nije jasno zašto je FBI baš sada objavio taj dokument. I dok su dokumenti iz Roswella godinama čekali na objavu, najnovija snimka NLO-a s Havaja obišla je svijet u jednom danu. 5 nepoznatih letećih objekata snimljeno je nad nebom otoka Ohua, točno iznad jednog vojnog kampa. SF fanatici to smatraju još jednim posjetom izvanzemaljaca, a brojni znanstvenici tvrde da NLO je privlače nuklearna postrojenja na zemlji.
Nakon Japana, NLO i iznad Havaja. Na internetu se pojavila nova jasna snimka NLO flote iznad vojne baze Makua na Havajima. Autentičnost snimke nije potvrđena, no ipak se podigla burna rasprava po raznim svjetskim forumima. Mnogi video uspoređuju s onim iz Japana gdje su slična svjetla na nebu uočena nakon potresa i tsunamija, te pokušavaju otkriti što bi blještavi objekti zapravo mogli biti.
you were coming, I again called a friend of mine who was a Navy doctor during the same time period we're talking about. Slightly after that, and he all of a sudden was healing a pilot, a person that had been pilot. And he began to tell him a story, and he basically said, one day I was up in one of the faster airplanes that we had, and I had something that was a spherical object that was ahead of me. And I called back and I said, are there any friendlies over here? He actually took off from a Texas location, headed off that way, and
towards New Mexico.
And he said, they said, well, no, there's no friendlies here. He said, not only that, but he's accelerating away from me, and yet I have the fastest airplane that's been designed. And
which at that time was...
And therefore it can't be one of us.
Well, that was...
And he said, well, they said, well, you have the weapon on board. It was a new design. Oh. And he said, go on ahead and shoot it down. And so he did.
He shot down the Roswell craft. Do you know who did it?
He said, don't give the people my name, nor give.
You know this man?
No, certainly.
He shot it down.
He's a very dear.
With what kind of a weapon?
The doctor is a very dear friend of mine.
What kind of a weapon?
I don't know. We have all kinds.
Because bullets were only 1,500 miles an hour back then.
We have
magnetic pulse. Soviet Russia.
Anyhow,
Nikola Tesla died in the Hotel New Yorker on July 7th, coming into the morning of the 8th in 1943. Freedom of Information Act request, FBI, FOIA documents reveal that Tesla's death ray was the only defense we had against atomic bombs. And the question is, as these documents reveal, this secrecy around the Tesla death ray, which is a laser weapon used to strike at an aircraft as a ray to short circuit all of its electrical systems, all of the spark plugs, all of the engineering in the craft to actually down the craft. The question is the Tesla death ray the weapon that was used, that Boyd Bushman's testimony tells us, to take down the flying saucer at Roswell? Because we know from the dates that the Tesla death ray was being developed in 1943 by the United States government, and the Roswell craft appears in our skies in 1947 in July, that there's plenty of time to have shot down them at Roswell.
Well, then the individual said that he went and landed at a nearby airport, went over and walked into the craft. Evidently one of them was out walking around, because there were only 3 when he was in.
3 aliens at that time?
And he walked in and they were all 4 feet and under, but he could see through the walls of the craft from the inside out.
Whoa.
And it kind of...
translucent material.
And the material he was stepping on was spongy, he said. It wasn't...
So what about this liquid wall at Roswell?
Well, if you will follow your friend and mine, Lazar, they didn't find any light bulbs, any electricity.
Well, you know, the flying saucer thing, from the Buddhist point of view, the Buddhists, for example, in the Avatamsaka Sutra, when the Buddha gives his sort of big first initial statement in this very large scripture,
begins at a U.S. Army airfield.
The press release stated that U.S. Army Air Corps had recovered a flying disc from a ranch north of Roswell. Frank Joyce drew only one conclusion.
The U.S. Army Air Corps says they have a flying saucer. It's got to be from outer space.
This just in, ladies and gentlemen.
Joyce broadcast the extraordinary story to his local audience. It was possibly the biggest news scoop of all time.
It's still the only time in the history of the United States where the government has said, we've got a flying saucer.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
The release revealed few other details. It said that a local couple had seen an unusual craft in the sky on July 2nd. A Major Jesse Marcel had recovered the debris. and it was now being taken to higher military headquarters. The incredible story was quickly picked up by Associated Press and released around the world.
As soon as this story came out, all hell broke loose. New York calls, London calls. God, the world wanted to know about this.
The concept of flying discs or flying saucers had caught the world's attention just 2 weeks earlier. On June 24th, a respected pilot, Kenneth Arnold, reported seeing 9 objects flying over Mount Rainier like saucers skipping over a pond.
Well, at about 2:15, I took off from Chehalis, Washington, and I noticed to the left of me a chain which looked to me like the tail of a Chinese kite. They looked something like a pie plate that was cut in half with a sort of a convex triangle in the rear.
Even though Arnold described the craft as having bat-like wings, the image of a flying saucer lodged with the public, and the term stuck. Over the next few weeks, hundreds of sightings of these new flying saucers were reported. The breaking news that one had been recovered near Roswell would at last unravel a mystery on the minds of anxious millions. What were these craft? How did they travel so fast? And were they from this planet or another?
I don't believe that it was anything belonging to the United States. I don't believe it was anything belonging to Russia.
One of the events that may have contributed to the opinions reflected in Mr. Hoover's memo is the apparent recovery of the wreckage of a crashed UFO by the United States Army. This happened on July 8th, 1947, and involves Major Jesse Marcel, who was, at that time, the intelligence officer at Roswell, New Mexico Army Air Force Base, the only atomic bomb wing in the world. Major Marcel is a combat veteran who shot down 5 enemy planes in World War II. A local rancher brought Major Marcel to a crash site located on a remote area of his ranch. They were astonished to find the vast amount of wreckage.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was. There were just fragments strewn all over the area, an area about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. So we proceeded to pick up the parts. A lot of it had a lot of little members with symbols that, to me, I call them hieroglyphics because I could not interpret them, could not be read. They were just like symbols of something that meant something. These little members could not be broken, could not be burned. I even tried to burn that. It would not burn. See, that stuff weighs nothing. It's not any thicker than tinfoil in a pack of cigarettes. He says, I tried to bend this stuff. He says, it will not bend. He says, we did all we could to bend it. It would not bend. He says, we even tried making a dent in it with a 16-pound sledgehammer. He says, still no dent in it.
A woman working in a radio station in Albuquerque, New Mexico, started to transmit on a news wire the story of Major Marcel's recovery of a crashed flying saucer. The FBI interrupted that communication with the statement, "Do not continue this transmission." An official Army press release was put out announcing the capture of portions of a flying saucer. Major Marcel escorted the wreckage on a B-29 to Carswell Air Force Base. The press was waiting for him, but he was told not to say anything by his commander, General Ramey.
The newsmen saw very little of that material, a very small portion of it. And none of the important things like these members that had these hieroglyphics or markings on. They wanted me to tell them about it, and I couldn't say anything. And when the general came in, he told me not to say anything, that he would handle it.
The reason that this story has remained hidden from the public for over 30 years is that General Ramey released a cover story at that point saying that the crashed flying saucer was really a weather balloon. The press around the world accepted that statement. The documented testimony of one of Major Marcel's B-29 crew members reveals that the UFO wreckage was removed from their B-29 by armed guards and placed on another aircraft. This seems rather strange treatment for the wreckage of a weather balloon.
More than 24 people in New Mexico associated with the UFO-related events of July 1947 have been interviewed. We have verified every statement made by Jesse Marcel.
A well-respected New Mexican engineer, Barney Barnett, has reported that a flying saucer crashed just outside of Socorro, New Mexico in early July 1947. Since this is the same date and very close to the location where Major Marcel recovered a crashed UFO, it seems probable that the crashed UFO Mr. Barnett reported is a larger piece of the crashed UFO Major Marcel recovered. Mr. Barnett saw a number of dead alien bodies extracted from that wreckage. He was accompanied by members of an archaeological expedition. A military group came along, swore everybody to secrecy, and carried off the saucer and the dead alien bodies.